the application of AI in research is a big theme at universities and also generally in society. I think a lot of people are excited about it. And I think it brings up some of the most fundamental questions that we haven't answered yet, which actually have nothing to do with AI per se. For example, what is the purpose of research? What are the goals? What is good research? What are we trying to achieve here? Because the more we go into AI as a tool and morphing that tool into an agentic workflow, in other words, agents doing research, the more we're going to have to answer some of these hard questions, which are, well, okay, what's the goal? What's the purpose? Whether we humans want to stay in control or not, that's not even the point here. But if we have an army of agents that do research and science, then they have to have some sort of goal. They need to be goal-driven because otherwise it's just a waste of energy. And ideally, we want to form those goals or formulate those goals in a way that they, God forbid, actually do what we want them to do. So if we could get to some fun, answers to, okay, what's the purpose of research? And what is good research? And how do we make sure that AI agents, let's call them agents from now on, that they do what we want to do? So those are the three big questions that I want to discuss today, inspired by the meetup here at Stanford, AI for Research. The meetup was just nothing too crazy. People talked about tools and coding and things like that. That's not the point. I think it just inspired me to have a deeper thinking, to think more thoroughly about, okay, what exactly are we trying to achieve here? What is happening here? And I want to just throw in one more thing, and it might sound a little bit out of left field, but it's not. And that is the mouse utopia. And what the mouse utopia is, real quick, it's an experiment which was done, 50 years ago somewhere in the US at a university. And they put a bunch of mice into a space, gave them a lot of space, gave them food, pretty much anything they could ever wish for. And then let those mice just evolve. I think there was enough space for, maybe they started with 8, and there was enough space for thousands of mice. So there was a lot of space and food and resources. So this experiment was meant to give a living intelligence enough room and space and resources so they never have to feel threatened. And what happened is that after about 6-7 years, so I don't know how many iterations that is in mice land, but maybe I think they could probably have kids twice a year or something. So about 10-20 iterations, the whole population became pretty lethargic. It became very aggressive and just not very productive. So why am I talking about this in the context of science? I think we have morphed into a society where science has lost its purpose, where there is a lot of pursuing science for the sake of science and not to pursue some overarching goal. And I think that's probably the first thing that I want to talk about. Before I go there, this is not even on podcast. It's March 3rd, 2026, and this is Crimdelco. For the year, we're down 12%. The market is flat. We're underperforming by 12%. So the purpose of science, in my opinion, has to be to generate knowledge that can lead to improving our chances of survival and improving our chances of reproduction. And when I say survival, it means the survival of the community which is doing the science. So let's say the country, or the alliance, Western alliance, China as a communist alliance, or some sort of unity that pursues the goal of survival. And that means actually winning wars. wars against external enemies, and also against internal enemies. So the society that you're part of, the society which is financing that science, has to have an overarching goal of actually protecting itself against enemies. I think that needs to be purpose number one. Number two is reproduction. Now, reproduction means we, as a society, you want to be able to sustain and reproduce yourself. It could also be, like Elon Musk says, in other galaxies or planets. But those are the overarching goals, because that's kind of the base of where we live or where we exist as human beings. That's the overarching goal that we're endowed with by nature ever since the Big Bang and all the subsequent developments. So that, I think, it just has to be said. I mean, maybe this is obvious for certain people. In my opinion, it's good to have this as an overarching goal, because it sets the directions and gives people a clear understanding of what their goal, what their job is. You know, if you study engineering or physics or both at university right now, you might want to actually think about the purpose of what you're doing. And the purpose of what you're doing should be to develop technologies that can help the Department of War protect against enemies, fight wars, win wars, keep the bad guys away. By the way, it also opens up a gigantic door for the non-technology fields, so the non-STEM fields, which we call humanities these days. Let's call them, for lack of a better word, maybe humanities is the wrong, because I think the legacy humanities are not going to do what I'm just going to say, which is there is a whole new slew of problems attached to a war-oriented research community, and that is you need to build a system of ethics and morals and the law that prevents the people in power or the society at grant to misuse all these tools for bad purposes. So the goal of protecting yourself against, like I said in the beginning, internal and external enemies. And internal enemies are the types of enemies that want to destroy you from the inside. Dictatorships, communism, socialism, any kind of collectivist endeavors are a risk that need to be taken seriously. So, which means that we also have a purpose for science and research beyond just the technical engineering-driven science and research. How can we build a society that that fulfills a contract with its members, doesn't incarcerate them, gives them freedom, gives them the ability to exert agency on their lives, gives them the ability to accumulate and spend the resources necessary for that type of agency. All of these things have to be safeguarded, and in a society particularly driven by agentic research, which will arguably accelerate research and science and knowledge discovery, we have to be on our toes. We have to be able to match that. If we have, for example, the ability to generate fast programs to execute certain, solve certain problems, and then therefore we have more intelligence, and therefore we're more powerful. We don't want to misuse that power. I guess that's what it comes down to. So I think this, to me, is the overarching purpose of science and research. It always has to be in the service of the community which owns that research. I think ownership is very important. I think as practitioners of science and research, academics, people who are involved in science, even entrepreneurs who are doing business with science. I think the question of ownership, like who owns this? Who owns Berkeley University? Who owns Stanford? What are these owners' obligations? What are their rights? What do you want from this? What is a good outcome? What is success? Right now, I think we live in a paperclip economy as far as academia is concerned, where success is measured in things like citations and publications. It's not a bad idea. It's like, it reminds me of early medicine, medieval medicine, where you're sick and you just take temperature. And I mean, there is a correlation between temperature and disease, but of course it doesn't really do anything more than just tell you, okay, fine, there is something going on in your body. And the same thing, if we take citations and publications as a measure of successful research, then we're just taking, we're just scratching the tip of the iceberg here. We're not really explaining what is good research. We're not explaining what is the purpose of that research, none of that stuff. We're just basically, I mean, there's a certain correlation between somebody that publishes a lot and gets cited a lot and quality of research, but the correlation is, arguably very weak. So I think, again, ownership and accountability. So if you're the dean of Stanford, your goal has to be to deliver technologies and moral and ethical and legal technologies to sustain a powerful society that can defend itself against powerful and dangerous enemies from outside and from within. And, that includes things like immunology. You want to defend yourself against, viruses, defend yourself against human viruses, things like woke idealism or extreme right-wing, stuff. All of these things are dangers to our society that need to be addressed the same way we need to address the danger of just being militarily inferior to somebody else that can then come and subdue us. So that has to be the goal, and these people should be measured against those goals. And I think once we formulate the goals along those lines, I think we have much better ways to measure success. We have much better ways to measure productivity. I think much better ways to allocate resources. So that's, in my opinion, one of the biggest advantages of having this type of attitude towards science and research. Now, the second thing I want to talk about, which is actually the inspiration for this talk, is once we have a clear purpose for science and research, we then can also use our agents, which will increasingly do the science and the research, arguably take over most of the knowledge creation away from humans. So once we understand what is actually needed, we can then have our agents do that. So we know what the agents are supposed to do. We know how to measure them. I mean, verification is one of the biggest problems in AI. So how do we know an agent is doing the right work? The same way we train the agent to execute the right code by having something like reinforcement learning with verification, the same way we should have a system of verification to make sure the agent's actually doing the right thing. And if we have a clear purpose, so let's say this piece of research is helping us develop better materials for nuclear power, because nuclear power is necessary to build propulsion for space and propulsion for submarines, and also electricity for data centers that help us keep our CO2 budget in line, and also take away a lot of other bad energy resources out of the grid, so we can actually have cleaner energy. So that's a good goal to pursue. And then there is maybe research in underground storage of CO2 for CO2 sequestration. It's not such a good goal to pursue, because it's not very clear what success actually means in that case. If we suck up all the CO2 from the air and then put it on the ground, is that the goal, or what's the goal? And I think this brings me to probably the most important item of conversation in this context, and that is that what is a goal? Like, how do you define a goal? And a goal has to be, a goal can either be good or bad. So people often, and this might sound very very obvious, but it's not true. Like, I think people pursue bad goals all the time. What is a bad goal? A bad goal is a goal that is not clearly defined, a goal that is not that has many solutions and often actually contradictory solutions. So, for example, climate change is a bad goal because it's not clear what it actually means, and you can literally do two things and claim that they're both good for climate change. For example, you can burn coal and you say, well, it's better to burn coal because we already built a factory to burn this coal than to build a new solar factory somewhere else, because that's going to use a lot of rare earth metals and stuff like that. So you can make the argument that it's actually better to burn coal and to keep, for climate change. And of course, you can make the inverse argument saying, no, burning coal is bad because we want to have renewable energy. So that's a bad goal. What's a good goal in the context of energy is decarbonization of energy. If you decide that that is a good goal to pursue, then it's very measurable. Like, that's the key. It's measurable, and goals that aren't measurable are bad goals. Most of the political rhetoric is around bad goals: climate change, equity, racial fairness. All of these things are bad goals that are very, very, they're suited for politicians to take advantage of the system and enrich themselves and their constituencies. They're very bad for the rest of us because again, we can't say that Nancy Pelosi is pursuing is failing in pursuing her goal of racial equity, because it's not clear what that means. And if she puts a few black people in some committee, and she can say that is, I'm doing it, versus, of course, racial equity in context of let's say Nancy Pelosi would mean many more things that she can't deliver against. But in the meantime, she's happily enriching herself and her constituency, and that is bad for the rest of us. And by the way, this is bipartisan, the same on the other side. If the Republicans claim that it's a good goal to have a strong army to protect ourselves against Islamic fundamentalism, then we have to be very honest about, well, I mean, how do we measure strong and how do we measure protect against fundamentalism? Because, for example, while we're bombarding Iran, we have Islamic fundamentalism in our country in front of our face, in Minnesota, for example, and we're not doing anything about it. In fact, we're letting those people just steal our taxpayer money and we're doing nothing. So are they really protecting us? No, they're just using this overarching goal of protecting us against Islam fundamentalism to enrich themselves. So goals can only be formulated if they're good goals. And I think a good goal, for example, is to be able to protect yourself against external and internal enemies, to have a lethal army that has deterrence as the main overarching goal. So deterrence being, you want to be so strong that nobody even thinks about attacking you. And you want to have also social, ethical, moral technology within your society to make sure that this very powerful technologies cannot be misused by the wrong players. Now, how that's being achieved, that's not the topic of this episode. I'm just trying to point out the necessities I think that we're all facing as a society right now, and that is we're developing incredibly powerful knowledge creation machines, and we should have a sense for what kind of knowledge these machines should create, because we still have the power. I mean, we're the sorcerer, and the sorcerer's apprentice is just about to take over the broom and to create thousands of brooms, and we're going to lose control over those broom developing agents. But we can still influence the way these agents work if we give them good goals. I think the discussion about goals is really the most important discussion we should be having in every department of the university, in every open town hall, from the community all the way up to the White House and across the globe, because we need to be able to, and we don't have a choice here. We don't have a choice. We can't just push this can down the road. If we don't decide our goals, if we don't communicate what our goals are, then the goals will take care of themselves, and that's not what we want. So again, I think having a strong deterrence-driven military, technology, and social, moral, ethical infrastructure, that's an overarching goal that I think is worth pursuing and is worth coding into our agents. I think the last question I want to tackle here is, so once we agree on that, then the question is, how do we do that? Okay, how do we actually make sure that these agents do what we want them to do? And the question here in particular tackles the question of open models versus closed models, government control of AI versus open competition. So things along those lines. And I think the answer here has to be, always is, that we absolutely don't want to have a central committee or a gremium or a committee of a few chosen powerful people or companies deciding that. I think if we look at the landscape right now, we have a few players in the market in the US and in China that are trying to monopolize their way of thinking. For example, Anthropic is clearly is driven by a pseudo openness towards a certain way of understanding that they have of political freedom, which is, let's say, if you want to know what they really think, just look at what happened under the Biden administration, because a lot of their thought leaders left the Biden administration, went to Anthropic. So it's kind of, exactly this schizophrenic Biden-esque, well, we're all happy-go-lucky and freedom, but then we're censoring everybody, and if you don't do what we say, then you're not part of that freedom, or something like that. So it's very scary. I think we have OpenAI, which is basically, I tell you what to do and shut up. We have Google, very similar. Google is the monster that doesn't show its claws, but has probably the sharpest claws. And then we have xAI with Musk, who wants to pursue truth and therefore isolate himself from all these other dangers, and just having truth as a North Star, giving him and his companies enough leeway to avoid all these pitfalls that the other companies are falling in. So that's kind of roughly the landscape. There's Meta also, but they're not a serious player. Amazon, they're not a serious player. They might become serious players, and then their attitude might differ a little bit from the others, but roughly that's where we stand right now. Then we have China. What they're doing is basically encoding the Communist Party's manifesto into their AI. So that's just, think of the Chinese AI, which is not open source at all. It's open source in terms of development, but then not in terms of content. So therefore, I think this whole communication that we're hearing from people also in Silicon Valley, that China has an open source community, that's not true. Anybody who's gone to China will realize very quickly there's nothing open about what's going on in China. You can't even access the internet properly there without surveillance. So it's not open at all. And the models and the thinking and the content of Chinese AI is fully controlled by the CCP now. They can't control everything, and there's always some slippage here and there, but overall, it's just not a free place. So anyway, this brings the question, okay, how should we actually do it? I mean, maybe it is okay to have sort of a Platonic, science-driven committee of super geniuses that work for Anthropic that tell us how we should think about the future of AI. Maybe it's okay just to have the strongest company, which used to be OpenAI. Now it's not anymore, but maybe, let's say, whoever wins this, let's say Google becomes a monopolist in AI, and then they decide. Or we have the fully truth-seeking algorithm, which of course steps on many people's toes, like the Grok algorithm of xAI. Those are open questions. I think competition is always good. I think that there is ample room for I think comes back to ownership in a sense that you also have to be take ownership. I don't mean just legal and financial ownership, but also moral ownership of what your models are doing, and then defend them if or defend yourself against if they do something wrong, and error correct, because I think fundamentally none of us knows exactly how to develop a system that is going to do the right thing here. So what we need is error correction mechanism. We need enough leeway for experimentation and leeway for error correction. And I hope that there are some interesting developments going on around Silicon Valley and elsewhere, where we have this highly iterative error correction mechanism. But again, it has to be embedded in an overarching goal. And I think the overarching goal has to be to protect our society from external and internal enemies, and to build a social, moral, and ethical infrastructure around that. So not just have the strongest technologies, but also have the kinds of societal, moral, ethical, legal infrastructure to support a very strong, technologically advanced society. Thank you.